the moment, how do you see the market going, especially, with interest rates still going up and unemployment going still within reasonable limit? How do you see the market and the construction and the real estate market panning out?
So, yeah, so it's an interesting one. There's always, within any market, there's always opportunities. And it's about recognizing those opportunities and being ready to pounce on them when they're available. So within this market right now, obviously, material costs, construction costs are through the roof, but that's not going to be that way forever. A lot of people are predicting that they're not going to come off the levels that they are at the moment. I beg to differ. I think, it's supply versus demand. Once
Mm,
the supply increases and we, in terms of the labor force, we stop having, people off sick from COVID, and some of the supply chain issues that are also affected by, international events that are currently occurring. Once all that starts to slow down a little bit, I think will be deflation is going to happen fairly quickly. I think the government's reacting as they should, and with
mm,
the mechanisms and the levers that they've got in terms of using interest rates as I suppose, as a dampening effect on demand.
yeah.
But the reality is, I think it's that sledgehammer approach is going to have quite a negative effect once it comes off at the other side of it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so in terms of construction costs, whilst they're high now, they won't be at that same level in 12 months' time. What level they're at, it's anyone's guess. I would have thought from where they've grown in the last 18 months. So say, for example, there's a prominent construction company that do a lot of construction for townhouse developers around in the eastern corridor and the southeastern corridor of Melbourne. And though that construction company builds a lot of investment grade type of product, and they were building as a turnkey product anyway. They were building at about $1,800 a square meter about 18 months ago. That same construction company in this market is building at $2,600 a square meter.
Wow.
So it's a substantial jump from where it was 18 months ago. At the end of the day, again, supply versus demand, what that does, it means that a lot of developers are choosing not to develop at the moment because they can't get things to happen to work.
Yeah.
So eventually that'll lead to a slowdown in the construction industry, which will then mean that a lot of those building companies and even the labour force providing labour to those building companies are going to need to rethink their own pricing strategies.
Mm,
And then essentially you would think that there will be a build-up on the supply side because of the lower demand from the material companies and the manufacturers and also the retailers that provide the materials, that we should see some decreases coming in to the market there as well. So my thoughts are it could be anywhere up to about 20% as in a decrease in the
okay.
cost of construction in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Other people have got quite different views, but that's my view.
Mm,
But the problem is, as a developer, if you're going to buy a site, you can only deal with what the known elements are in property development. And the known elements are that if you're trying to do a feasibility and you're acquiring a site now, you've got to acquire a site based on what the property prices or construction prices are now. You don't factor in, unless you're doing real long-term projects like, 10-year plus projects, you can't factor in price decreases, or even you can't factor on your costs. But you can't factor in at the other side of it as well. You shouldn't be factoring in price escalations or market value movements in the values of your property in 12 months' time.
yeah.
because it's a false economy. You don't know what's going to be happening in 12 months' time.
Correct.
You can make predictions, and if more so, you should be conservative about your predictions. So your costs should be at least what they are now if you predict them for them to go down. And if you're not sure in terms of where the valuations are going to be of properties, if there's any potential that you think that maybe prices may be coming off a bit, you should be factoring that into your feasibility analysis as a potential risk. So, yeah, so my point of view, I think that there's opportunities there. I think there's going to be a lot of developers that have purchased sites maybe, 12 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. They've probably gone through the planning process, haven't been able to sell those, got the planning approvals, haven't been able to sell any products off the plan, may have not been able to get finance, may be working out right now that they just don't stack up. They may be looking at the opportunity cost of their funds. Their investors may be giving them grief because the project's taking a lot longer than what it was supposed to, and they've got diminishing returns and all those type of things. So there may be potentially some fire sales that might happen in these next 12 months. So that's when the opportunities to strike as a property developer and to take up potentially some discounted product that may be coming onto the market. It may or may not happen that way, but you've got to be prepared for it. And I think there'll be a little bit that will happen. With all of that being said, and looking longer term, and particularly with some of the things that are happening from a government perspective and what they're trying to encourage, and them trying to build the labour force here also in Australia. Obviously, we've seen them announce that they're going to be increasing our immigration rates again, and essentially they'll be up over 200,000 people will be migrating to Australia on an annual basis. All those people need somewhere to reside. So they're either going to be renting something or they're going to be buying something. So that's going to either put demand on the rental market, or it's going to be putting demand also on the acquisition side. Now, particularly with a lot of other countries where people come from countries that you can't buy freehold property, and you can only buy leasehold in a lot of countries, particularly a lot of Asian countries. The opportunity when they come to Australia and they see that you can actually buy a freehold property and that they actually own that title is quite attractive to them. So a lot of the migrating population will be attracted to, again, if they can afford it, they'll be attracted to acquiring a property as opposed to renting a property. So there are opportunities there in terms of that demand on the product. So in terms of how that works then in terms of valuations on properties, my view is in terms of valuations at the moment, you're getting a lot of the economists that are factoring in or substantial devaluation of properties in the next 12 months to 2 years. I've heard figures up to 20%. Personally, I can't see that happening because of the other factors I was talking about before, particularly with our increasing numbers that we'll be bringing in from migration. I can see certain areas, though, that have had massive growths in the last couple of years. I can definitely see those markets cooling off a lot and being significantly devalued. Say, for example, a lot of these, with COVID, there was a big exodus in terms of people looking to go into coastal and regional areas. I've got a holiday home down at Venus Bay that over COVID went up nearly 70 to 80%. Now, that's not sustainable. And also, for me, it was an artificial growth and an artificial valuation that was always going to come off. So when you're talking about properties coming off, that property probably does have at least 20 to 30% to come off. So when you get the economists that are talking about 20%, it's not a broad brush in terms of where that 20% or that deflation is going to happen. I think it's going to be in quite specific areas where we've had,
unrealistic growth.
Correct. We've had these unrealistic spikes because of people thinking about working from home, or people thinking about I suppose lifestyle decisions about where they want to live.
Yeah.
But I think that the swings and roundabouts will come back around again. That once that all this stuff dies down with COVID, and once I suppose the fascination and the fantasy of living in some of these areas kind of wears off, I think we'll see, quite significant deflation in those specific areas. But say, for example, a lot of the inner suburbs of Melbourne, if you look at over the last 5 years, they haven't had significant growth. But they've had some positive growth, they've had some negative growth, they had some positive growth pre-COVID, and they've come off maybe 5 to 10%. But I think we'll see quite a dampening effect in that market. I can't see that coming off much more. It might come off a little bit, but I think it'll plateau.
Yeah.
But once that migration starts to kick in, I think it'll be those markets that will see potentially will actually see growth. At the same time, those other regional and coastal markets will be getting substantial deflationary pressures on the pricing.
Okay. Wow, quite interesting. If you could go back to teach to your younger self, or to teach to your kids, what would you teach them?
Don't be afraid of risk, but make sure it's a measured risk. Make sure you don't bury your head in the sand with risk, and don't be so make sure you understand it, and make sure you try to, as best as you can, mitigate against it, but don't let it stop you from doing things. I think naturally as an accountant, you're quite conservative when it comes from a risk point of view, but that by being conservative, it can stop you from taking on a lot of opportunities that
you have taken. Correct.
You miss a lot of opportunities because of your conservative nature being an accountant. And definitely for me, I've missed a lot of opportunities over my life from being conservative in terms of what I do. And I suppose it wasn't until, a number of years ago that when I started to get into property development, that I started to be a little bit more of a risk taker from that perspective, to say, look, if I'm going to get ahead in life, I'm going to need to do more than just, being an employee and taking a wage for an employment. I need to look at, either starting my own business, or look at some of these property development opportunities or other investment opportunities if I'm going to get anywhere in life. So don't be afraid about risk, but take a risk measured focus when you do it. Just understand the risks and be measured about it. The other thing is find something that you're passionate about. So I've always been passionate about property, and I've loved it. I've always invested in it. As I said, my first investment property when I was 22. Find something that you're passionate about, because there's no one wants to go to work just to earn some money. You've got to be excited about what you're doing. Otherwise, the stresses and pressures of life can be quite depressing sometimes, even going to work.
Very much so.
And suffocating. So but if you're doing something you're passionate about and something that you really love, and you love going to work and love doing what you do, you're going to be enthusiastic, but you're also going to be much more successful at it. So find that thing that really drives you, that something that you're really passionate about. And then get into it, and don't be afraid to take risks, but measured risks in what you're doing.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. Very interesting. Now, if there's one thing you would want to do in your lifetime, what would it be and why?
One thing I would like to do in my lifetime. I'm actually not sure. I think I think with me, it's always work-life balance. I've worked for, larger accounting firms where that probably isn't their objectives. It's, you work for the company and they'll take every blood, sweat, and tear out of you and until you're exhausted. But for me, it's always work-life balance. So if there's any one thing, it'll be more on that lifestyle basis. So it'll be, for me, it's always make sure that we get in, a decent holiday every year and spend time with the family. For me, is my number one goal is family time and having a break and unwinding. So my one thing every year, get your holidays, work hard, play hard. Have that proper balance in life. Don't let work consume you so much to exhaustion.
So true. So true. And last but not least, any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave with us? What would it be?
I think it goes back to some of those points that we were talking about before. If you're going to go into property development, focus on what you're good at. You're not going to be great at everything. You can learn a lot of aspects about property development in a lot of different areas, but focus on what your skill sets are and what you're great at, and then surround yourself with experts that are good in all of those other areas. That expert team, and particularly trusted experts, is really important in property development. Even from my own perspective, sometimes, I had to learn the hard way. And it was the reason why, if I backtrack to the reason why I set up the networking group in Melbourne with Property Developers Melbourne, the reason why I set up that networking group in the first place is because you don't know what you don't know until things go wrong. And where I thought I knew a lot about property development and I thought I had a good team around me, I didn't realize how poor some of the experts were that I was dealing with until, excuse the French, but until shit hit the fan. So when I was developing property in the middle of the GFC, and basically I really had to roll up my sleeves and really had to take on board some of the other advisors. One of my, say for example, the project manager almost went amiss through the GFC. I had to essentially take on his job and his role to make sure our projects were successful, even though I had no idea or no skill sets or background in project management. I really, again, I had to roll up the sleeves, get into there, but then I had to rely on bringing some other experts around to support me around me and really to be able to do that service myself. Otherwise, the project wouldn't have been successful. So again, the idea of starting up the networking group was to expand my networks within the property development industry. So I had a number of different networks, or now I've got 16,000 members within our networking group. So there's probably not an issue that I would have in property development right now that I wouldn't have a trusted expert that I could go to help me solve that particular issue. So surround yourself with your experts, and don't be complacent as well. Don't think because you've done developments a number of times that you can't continuously educate yourself. I'm always looking for ways to educate myself in whether it's property development from a financing perspective, whether it's from as an accountant, and as a CPA, I have to update my knowledge on tax and advisory services on an annual basis anyway. But again, mine's singularly focused on tax. So I'm never going to stop learning about tax and accounting issues associated with property development transactions. One, because I have to,
Yeah.
but secondly, I'm interested in it as well, and that's what makes me a good advisor. So continue to learn, continue to challenge yourself. Don't be complacent and rest on your laurels from your previous successes that you've had. Sometimes, again, I get developers that are even career developers that still make mistakes, 20 years, 30 years into developing, because they get complacent. And I've had a developer say, for example, you don't want to be complacent in this environment and going into doing a financial feasibility saying, okay, 2 years ago I did the last project and my construction costs were X amount of dollars. That's what I'm going to put in my feasibility for this next project that I'm looking to acquire, or this next site I'm looking to acquire. As we know, if you took those steps without doing your research and without contacting all of your builders within your network to inquire about what the construction costs are, you could make a disastrous mistake and a disastrous assumption by being complacent about it. So don't be complacent. Continue your education. Always educate yourself.
Excellent. So any concluding remarks now? Are there any questions that I could or should have asked, but did not ask you on the final takeaway from today's chat?
I think we've covered off most of it. And as I said, for myself, I've definitely, had a vast career across all different areas and sectors within the property development industry, and worn a number of different hats. So I can kind of put a lot of the pieces of the puzzle together, where it's really hard for a greener developer to be able to do that, because there are a lot of difference and various factors that go into a property development transaction. So I think we've covered off on most of the main points. Get education, learn. Before you go out and even think about being a property developer, you really need to understand the basics of it. And you need to understand, the risks of property development. You need to understand, all the key aspects of property development, from marketing and selling to planning, construction, even the legal aspects of property development. For lawyers love property developers because, you're probably dealing, and a lot of the times these legal firms, property developers are typically their biggest clients, because, you've got the potential. It's not just your legal documentations that you need to produce for acquiring a property. It's your legal documentations associated with onboarding investors. It's your legal documentations for engaging all your consultants and your contractors. It's then your sales contracts. And then it's litigation that always seems to happen, because in property, the general rule of thumb is, stuff always goes wrong, and nothing's.
And how do you mitigate that risk from a legal perspective? Yeah.
And so you've got to make sure that you understand that property development is going to be challenging. You've got to be prepared to get down into the trenches and really roll up your sleeves as well, and be prepared to fight, because sometimes it's not easy. And there's a lot for as many property developers that are successful, there's probably 2 to 3 that aren't. Even though that you'll get a lot of people telling you how much money they've made out of property, they don't tell you about, again, it's like a gambler. They always tell you about their wins. They never tell you about their losses. But you learn from your losses. But you don't always have to learn from your own losses. Learn from other people's mistakes. Speak to your advisors. Speak to your consultants. They'll be able to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about everything. So, yeah, just make sure, again, educate yourself before going in. Don't go in there blindly because it's too much money that you've got at risk.
Now, for people who are just listening, not watching the videos, how can people get in touch with you for your professional service thing?
So obviously we've got a website. It's Payne Advisory Group, Payne spelled Payne, advisorygroup.com.au. Check out our website. We've got, if you look under our specialization pages, we've got a specific section there for property developers, also property investors, and also for anyone looking to potentially wanting to scale their property development activity, and they might want to look at some of the funds management stuff and services that we offer as well. So check out our website. You can also email me at ben@payneadvisorygroup.com.au, or my mobile phone number also is 0408 455 868.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah. I mean, as part of the video, we will include all your contact details, but for people just listening, not watching, then it's good to have a contact. Okay, again, thanks very much again for coming onto the show. It's been really nice talking to you, and hopefully our audience will get lots of gold nuggets from our discussion today.
Excellent. Thanks, Al. I've enjoyed it.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.